Welcome to Narrative Responsibility, a podcast about examining the meta-story of your life, how well it is serving you, and how to change it for the better. I'm Elena Wolf, relationship coach and life alignment mentor, and this is this week's New Perspective.
Hi there. I'm so glad you're here today. This is episode 45. Types of Intimacy. This is a companion to last week's episode titled, Which MBTI Type Should I Date?, which was a dissection of how the aspects of cognition described by type are too complex for a one-size-fits-all sort of dating axiom. For any of the 16 MBTI types, there is no one personality to rule them all and into happiness bind them. One important dating question that we tabled last time was, what kind of relationship do you actually want? Today, I'm going to explore what I meant by that. I'm going to start with a deeper discussion of intimacy in its various forms, based on what I brought up last time, and then dig into this question of what kind of relationships might be possible or desirable for you. So, last episode, I offered a very high-level commentary on intimacy and the fact that it comes in many more varieties than sexual intimacy. How then might the various types of intimacy that we can form with others shape our relationship goals, both as individuals and as couples? Intimacy is about being known and accepted in your fullness. But there are different ways of being known. Do you want someone to know you from the inside out? That is, to understand how you work because they work in a similar way? Or do you want someone to know you from observation and interactions, from seeing you through their own eyes rather than through your own? Do you want to be understood because you have explained yourself to someone, or do you want them to learn by experiencing you and noticing how you respond to things? And does this idea of being known in your fullness mean being understood in your entirety as you are now? Or is it being seen through time and known over a long timeline and maybe even through multiple iterations of yourself? We experience intimacy in different ways because, again, we are complex intelligences with multiple dimensions of awareness and cognition. I'm going to unpack some of the various forms of intimacy as I see them so that we're on the same page about how I'm using these terms. Which type or types of intimacy you are seeking in a romantic partner are pretty important for conceptualizing your relationship ideal. I'll start with psychological intimacy. I view this as understanding how someone perceives the world, how they make decisions, what their belief structures and conditioned expectations are, what their values are, these kinds of questions. The MBTI and Jungian type is one pathway to this, but it's far from the only one, and it's far from a complete path in and of itself, even if you take it. A lot of people who have never heard of any personality typing system are naturally empathetic and good at putting themselves in someone else's shoes, entering someone else's phenomenological world, to use philosophy terms. A lot of people are good at noticing aspects of a problem that someone else tends to consider important, and also what they tend not to notice. And they can be really good at recognizing where some past experience that someone had is influencing that person's present moment perception. None of those aspects of empathy require any particular type or even an understanding of psychological type. Emotional intimacy is witnessing emotions and being present with someone while they experience them. Often, part of emotional intimacy is also shared emotional experiences where both people have synced to one another and are sharing an energetic connection that is unique to them and that moment. I view emotional intimacy as distinct from psychological intimacy because you can experience it without deep knowledge of the other person. Sometimes it even happens spontaneously in a shared moment between strangers. Another aspect of emotional intimacy that is maybe one that emerges from psychological intimacy is sharing hopes and dreams for the future, because these are often tied to feelings we are experiencing or want to experience in our life, like a dissatisfaction with where we are now or a yearning to experience something different. This kind of expression can be very vulnerable, especially if the dream involves doing or becoming something very different from where we have been thus far, or if it feels like an ambition few people in the world are able to realize, or if it's a vision that few people in the world are able to recognize at all or to understand as valuable. Dreams might be career or accomplishment related, of course, but they might also be about artistic expression, or relationship goals, or life experiences, or even existential concerns. A desire to hike the Appalachian Trail can be just as much of an ambition as a desire to become a doctor. Spiritual intimacy is yet another distinct form of intimacy. It can come from having shared experiences of the numinous with someone, or from mutual sharing about encounters with the numinous as you both experienced it individually. In my observation, this is one of the most vulnerable types of intimacy for most people because Western culture leaves so little space for genuinely spiritual encounters. The secular world is science-based and rational, while formal religious services often feel like a social performance or a script. At most, they offer hints of wonder or glimpses of the divine maelstrom, but they kind of keep it at a safe remove. And when a person finds themselves thrust into the midst of a deep spiritual experience, they often have no idea what to do. It's confusing. It's something they don't have language for. It's an experience they've never heard anyone else talking about it. And often when they try to explain it to someone else or to describe what they're experiencing, the person looks at them or even says to them, "You sound crazy," because we have poor language for describing these transrational experiences. Even when they are deeply affecting transitions in our life or possibly even initiations into a new phase of life or a new understanding of the world, there often isn't a way to convey directly with our words how powerful it is or how intense it is. Sometimes the best we can do is to create a piece of art or write something like poetry or a story that conveys someone else going through this. And that's the closest approximation we can get to expressing to someone else what we felt and how deeply it shook us. Yes, I am speaking from experience here. So because there's such a dearth of examples and lack of language for it in Western culture, I think it's especially hard for people to be open about it. So again, that type of intimacy is maybe especially rare or especially difficult to find. Intellectual intimacy is actually probably one of the more common types, especially in Western culture, since we do shy away from spiritual and honestly often emotional intimacy. So intellectual intimacy is receiving someone's ideas and their why for those ideas. This podcast is a great example of at least a one-way experience of intellectual intimacy. You are getting intimately familiar with my ideas and my ideals and how I came to them and what I think their implications are. Now, in a reciprocal relationship, this exchange would go both ways and probably yield a unique perspective that only became possible from the blending of two diverse sets of experiences and different areas of expertise and special interest. Experiential intimacy is yet another form. Experiential intimacy can be acute or ongoing. Experiential intimacy is experiencing with someone and the sort of shared connection that comes from having those experiences together. Sometimes it might be a single event, such as attending a residential summer camp or both of you participating in a really charged protest. Can't imagine why I would be bringing those up right now in 2025. Even if you never see those people again, an intimacy was created because you experienced the same thing that most other people did not experience. Or there might be maybe parallel experiences, such as two people who were both college athletes or two people who both lost a parent at the same age. And those experiences weren't shared in the sense of going through them together, but there's a shared understanding that people who did experience that are going to have with each other that people who did not experience those things just aren't going to have. In an ongoing sense, experiential intimacy is about sharing life together, knowing someone over a long time. That's where you have years of your own story unfold along someone else and their story, and you get to know multiple versions of each other, or you witness multiple eras of each other's lives, if you will. I've seen it said that if you're friends with somebody for 7 years, you're likely to stay friends with them for a lifetime. Someone who becomes woven into the story of your life, whether they're a friend or a romantic partner, is someone who is an intimate part of your life. A related, but I think still separate category is historical intimacy. And what I mean here is about knowing someone's story. This might be biographical knowledge if you were there to witness it, but it might be autobiographical knowledge if they simply told you about the parts of your life that you weren't there for, but you still kind of lock them in to your memory and your concept of that person. And sometimes even if you were there, they still need to correct what you saw because it was an incomplete picture, or maybe they didn't understand the implications of their own experience until much later. And as they're rewriting their view of themselves and their history, it ends up kind of restructuring your view of them too. Physical intimacy is giving and receiving physical affection and comfort. This is, again, distinct from sexual intimacy. So this is going to be more like co-regulating your nervous system with someone else's, feeling comfortable to offer them physical reassurances or just acknowledgments of your contact and connection. And finally, sexual intimacy is sharing sexual encounters and energy with someone. We can have intimacy in its various forms, both with other people and with ourselves. Now, I've seen it suggested that we can only have intimacy with others to the extent that we have it with ourselves, but in my observation, intimacy with others can sometimes be a pathway to intimacy with self. So I don't think that it's one leading to the other in some strict hierarchical way. They're both equally important to a long-term relationship's health and success. So whether it initially flows from the inside out or the outside in. The point is that it flows, and over time it's going to become both. It's going to be flowing both ways for both people. Probably the best metaphor I have heard to conceptualize a long-term relationship, and honestly, this is true for friendships as well as romantic partners, but since we're here talking about dating, I guess I mean it more in that context today. But my favorite metaphor that I've heard is that a relationship is a conversation that just keeps going. I love the simplicity of that image. And certainly for me, it matches how I want to be in relationship with someone. Do I want to just keep talking to them, to keep learning about them and growing the total of shared concepts and context and in-jokes and experiences and hopes and things that we've talked about? It's definitely a conversation for me. But I don't know that it has to be a literal conversation for everyone. I think probably the form of this conversation can vary from couple to couple, and maybe even it can vary between the members of a couple as long as they're both engaging with both conversations. I've seen musicians, for example, whose conversation is between their chosen instruments. It's not a conversation in words, but it is an ongoing exchange of ideas and energy that just keeps building on itself over time, adding intricacy and layers of meaning and new permutations. Some people's conversation might be dancing. Others' conversation might be traveling together and experiencing more and more of the world. Others might carry on a conversation of quietly unfolding life in the same place, side by side, interlocking their tasks and roles in this harmony of industry. Different Myers-Briggs types are likely to have different conversation preferences, but also remember that you might be able to have and be happy with a different form of conversation if you're with one partner versus another. We are all multifaceted beings. No two relationships of any kind, whether platonic, romantic, familial, whatever, no two relationships will bring out exactly the same sides of us. No two people know exactly the same version of us, because no two people connect with the exact same parts of us or evoke the exact same energetic response from us. There is an alchemy between two people that is more than the sum of their types, even if type might predict aspects of their dynamics. That said, most people also have some fundamental needs that a prospective partner has to be able to meet for them for a relationship to have long-term potential. So, what kinds of intimacy from that list above, or maybe some other kind I didn't think of, are you looking for? And what kinds of intimacy are the other person looking for? Can that person meet your intimacy needs in terms of type and level, and can you meet theirs? Relationships are always flowing two ways. Two people don't have to want exactly the same things as long as they can both sustainably meet the other in the ways they need in exchange for the other meeting them as they need. Also, what level of intimacy both people are looking for plays a part. Even if two people want the same kinds of intimacy, if they're seeking wildly different depths of it, then they may actually be less compatible than it seems. In fact, they might be less compatible than two people looking for different kinds of intimacy, but the same depth. Another angle to consider is what role you want to play in your romantic relationship. Let's look at introversion and extroversion as they relate to social needs, as an example. Do you want to be the partner who is the more social and active one, the more extroverted one, or would you prefer to be the less extroverted one? Or would you prefer someone who matches you on their level of social engagement? For some people, this won't really be a question because they're going to fall at one extreme or the other and pretty much always be the more extroverted or the more introverted personality in any partnership that they're in. But a lot of people are somewhere in the middle. So if you are an introvert with high social needs or an extrovert with low social needs, then you may find yourself pivoting the role that you play depending on who you are in relationship with. I am an example of an introvert with a really high need for social engagement. I would almost certainly be the more extroverted partner if I were with another introverted personality. By this, I mean I'd be the one making plans with our friends more often, seeking out or suggesting more events for us to attend, going to things on my own if my partner was feeling depleted, planning the dinner parties I wanted us to host, and so forth. But I could also easily be the less social partner if I were in a relationship with a highly social extrovert. For me personally, either role is comfortable, it's just a really different relationship. If I were the more social partner, that would cast me in the role of being the playful one who was instigating adventures and bringing the lulls. On the other hand, with a really lively bon vivant, I would be the more serious partner who's keeping an eye on the time and making sure we get home early enough to actually sleep, and probably keeping at least a few nights blocked off on the calendar for downtime. That kind of dynamic is what I mean by what part do you want to play. The relative level of any one trait or another between you and any given other person might shift whether you are the partner who leads or follows in that area of life. So, if you have any domains where you know you want to lead, or where you know you want the other person to lead, then maybe that's one way to guide your choices in terms of the kind of relationship you're looking for. Going back to our conversation metaphor, what kind of conversation do you want to have? What kind of conversation do you want that relationship to explore? Are there any domains of life where you would be unhappy if you could not share it with your partner? Or activities that you would be forever sad to not be able to do with them instead of just do on your own? What about places where you don't care so much if they join you? Or maybe there's even places where you would prefer that you're keeping that to yourself and not sharing it with them. These are all important things to consider. Some examples of activities that could fall into any of the above categories, depending on your personal preferences, might be hobbies or travel or learning or even certain chores. For every person who wants to cook dinner together every night is another who prefers to cook alone and trade off nights, and another who wants to do all of the cooking or none of it in exchange for another task. Another more metaphorical way to think about relationships and the part that you play both in the relationship and with your partner might be to think of it as a landscape. And, what is this landscape and what part do you and your partner each play in it? Like, what is the ecosystem of your relationship? Is it an ecosystem where your respective contributions are entwined, or maybe one where they're more complementary, or maybe one where they're just sort of parallel? For example, are you the pine trees and they the oaks, and together you create a forest? Or are they the sea and you the sky, two distinct forces forever interacting and exchanging water back and forth, but also never becoming the same thing? Then there are the different human roles that partners can play for each other. Things like mindmate, playmate, cheerleader, emotional supporter, practical supporter, co-dreamer, or envisioner and figure-outer, mentor-mentee, co-builders. I mean, it can go on and on. There's a lot of different sort of relational archetypes that can come into play. But one thing to consider is what roles you are most comfortable playing. Are there any roles that you absolutely could not sustainably perform? And again, different partners and different relationships will offer you the chance to play different roles. MBTI type can absolutely play a part in these dynamics. As an example, for me as a thinker woman, and this would be true in reverse for any feeler man, because both of these categories run counter to Western gender expectations. If I were in a relationship with another thinker, as the female, I would be the one who's more emotionally attuned, probably playing more of a cheerleader, emotional navigator, and envisioner role. But in a relationship with a feeler, I'd probably be the one who's more figuring out how to make things happen, who's architecting big goals, and who's navigating us through crises with more of a logical, practical, pragmatic perspective. Is one role for me to play better than the other? Or are they just different experiences that offer me different opportunities to build skill with divergent areas of myself and my cognition? Beyond type, personal experiences and skills, either developed or not developed, will influence which relational roles someone is comfortable in. What role did they play in their family and their various friend groups over the years? Previous relationships? What roles have they played in work contexts or extracurricular activities? I'm actually going to talk more about this next time, the ways that our experiences can give us extra type skills, along with how our experiences shape the way we interact with other MBTI types. But for today, I want to wrap up this concept of intimacy as a multifaceted, multi-layered structure that can take many forms and look very different from one relationship to another. The different selves we express in our different relationships are like our own personal multiverse. Is Miles Morales a better Spider-Man than Peter Parker? I don't know. Is Gwen a better love interest than Mary Jane? I don't know. They're just different. The different ways we can build and experience intimacy both with self and with other affect our growth in a symbiotic way. Where we have more skill or familiarity, we often have more comfort or desire. And the more time we spend doing something, the more skill and discernment we gain with it. So choosing which types of intimacy to pursue in many ways is a choice of which type of growth you are committing to. Now, it does need to be said that the opportunities we have for experiencing intimacy with others are just that, opportunities, not guarantees, because all adult relationships are consensually co-created. And the opportunities that we have also affect our ability to grow to our fullest in one direction or another. Sometimes we are forced to grow in one way because there really isn't an opportunity to grow with someone else in any other direction, maybe in the direction we even wanted to take. We choose all of our relationships, but a relationship only goes as far as both people involved choose to take it. And we can't control the choice someone else makes to engage in a relationship with us or not, or what types of growth and what types of intimacy they wish to pursue. So while we can choose to say yes to certain types of intimacy and certain types of growth and certain types of roles in our relationships, we don't get to choose the opportunities we're presented with that we're either saying yes or no to. And going back to our question of what kind of relationship do you even want? What kind of intimacy do you want? What do you want that conversation of relationship to look like? Honestly, there probably isn't going to be a super clear answer for any of us. Only a contextual answer. What kinds of intimacy we want and how it looks is going to depend on the context of which relationship we're in. And what kind of relationship we want is going to depend on who we're in a relationship with. Even our self as a common element is not a stable indicator because we can play very different roles and have very different types of intimacy in different relationships. Intimacy is complex, contextual, expansive. There might be a point where you have attained a type of intimacy with another person as kind of like a have it or don't have it binary for that aspect of intimacy. But the degree of intimacy which has been explored can always grow as the two of you continue to grow as individuals and as the co-creators of your relationship. Just like your conversation that never ends, your intimacy has no endpoint beyond which no further intimacy can be attained. And I think that's really beautiful. It feels like the relational version of our mandala of self, ever unfolding, ever deepening in its complexity and intricacy. So that's it for this week. Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. I know you have many options for how to spend your time, and I hope that I've given you some return on that investment. If you want to know more about my work as a coach, you can check out thepatternbreaker.com. If you want to support the podcast and help it grow, recommend it to a friend. Join my Patreon, patreon.com/narrative responsibility. Leave me a rating and review. And until next time, what part of your story are you going to take responsibility for this week?